Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's topic is Ship Fast and Confidently with Lightstep and GitLab. We'll give everyone just one more minute to join, and then we'll kick it off. All right, thanks everyone for joining us today. Again, this presentation is going to be on Ship Fast and Confidently with Lightstep and GitLab. Just a housekeeping item before we kick this off. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, just hit that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will take those at the end of the presentation. And now let's hand it off to the presenters.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. My name is Kevin Chu. I am one of the presenters today. I'm a group product manager for GitLab. I oversee our configure and monitor stages. I can talk a little bit more about what that means later on in the presentation. Austin?
Yeah, hi. My name is Austin Parker. I'm Principal Developer Advocate at Lightstep. My role here is to help our developers and sort of the wider development community understand observability and how to instrument their software for it, and really show the power that can give you in terms of understanding your complex applications.
Awesome. So today, the agenda is to kind of briefly describe the problem and offer some best practices that we think that you should implement, give you a great demo showing both GitLab and Lightstep. But before we get to the meat of the topic, which is mainly observability, I want to talk about the higher goals. Like, why do we care about DevOps? Why do we use tools like GitLab and Lightstep? At the end of the day, I believe everyone is adopting these tools, adopting processes and changing their culture, because everyone wants to ship products, software faster. The faster you ship, the faster you learn, the faster you make your products better and solve real problems for your customers, the more successful you're going to be. So I believe everything is with the goal that to move faster, to innovate faster. And luckily for us, over the past decade or two, organizations have a lot of tools, processes that they can adopt to improve the speed of innovation. But as teams continue to adopt more DevOps, more automation, more dynamic infrastructure, there is a cost. The cost is that software today is much more complex than it has ever been. And I would say that this complexity is the real reason we all need observability, because observability is all about solving for the thing you didn't even know that you need to solve for. But we'll talk more on that later. So going back to the fact that we have complex software today, a lot of you, including me and my teams, started adopting more and more software and tools to enable us to do things easier. So as a result, all the tools that you use today might look something like this. So instead of just focus on writing code, you might have teams of people trying to get all these tools to actually work together. So to solve your original problem of being able to deliver value sooner and more frequently, this has turned into another set of problems of managing an ever-growing list of software and tools to help you do that. We think this is where GitLab comes in. You may know GitLab as the other Git service, but actually GitLab is much more. Our vision is to be a single application for the entire DevOps delivery lifecycle. We want you and your team to collaborate more on delivering customer value faster instead of dealing with the complexity found in native, cloud native development and dealing with all the tools that you have to manage. I am going to switch screen. Let me know if you can see it. I think you can. I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of GitLab. So just focusing in on the navigation menu on the left-hand side, this is probably familiar to most of you. It's a Git service, a Git repository with all the usual things that you can do. For some of you, we call pull request, merge request, which may be a change. So focusing kind of on the operation side of GitLab, GitLab operations, including monitoring and configure, is built on the premise that we believe Kubernetes is going to continue to be part of most people's stack in some way. It's a very powerful platform. It's extremely popular. So we built our tooling on top of Kubernetes. So within GitLab, you can connect your existing Kubernetes cluster to GitLab or create a cluster from within GitLab. And for the purpose of this demo, what I've done is I created a simple Ruby on Rails application, and I created a Kubernetes cluster from within GitLab, and then I enabled Auto DevOps. Auto DevOps, what it is a way to easily configure things so that all the best practices in software engineering is kind of baked in to our CI/CD pipeline. And I'll show you a pipeline job that I created earlier. What Auto DevOps have set up is all the steps that you see here on the screen, including obviously building the application, checking for code quality, scanning your containers to make sure there's no vulnerabilities that are known, and further scanning your dependencies for the same thing, making sure that all the licenses are aligned as expected. SAT stands for static application security testing. So we kind of look at your code to make sure that there's not any known security vulnerabilities within your code and run any tests that's associated to your application. We also build what we call the review app, which we then run a dynamic application security test on top of right here. And we can deploy to production, which is automatically set up via Auto DevOps. We do performance testing, and then we clean up the review app. As we think about observability, one improvement that we're constantly thinking of is how do we take the output of whatever we're observing or monitoring and bake it in as an input to deployment or continuous integration. So that's something we're actively working on today. Going back to the presentation. So beyond the basic functionalities I showed you just now, here's a single slide that shows all of GitLab's ambitions for the future. GitLab is a complete DevOps application that we believe can help you ship code faster. As you saw, this also includes actually, I may have forgotten to show you that, but GitLab also includes some monitoring solutions out of the box. What we do is we have a Prometheus instance deployed to your cluster that's attached to your GitLab instance, and we can monitor metrics, and we can also do we can also deploy an elk stack to help you with your logging, along with some other capabilities out of the box, right next to where you develop your code within GitLab. This is a great fit for applications that are obviously built using Kubernetes and are relatively simple in nature. For more complex applications, for those big microservices applications where you need more powerful tools, we think that Lightstep is actually a fantastic option. And it is a tool that can help you achieve observability. So I'm going to turn it over to Austin to talk more about observability in detail.
Yeah, first off, I think we want to start here. We have a little poll, if Adelia could put that up. And what I want to know is, roughly where do you sort of see yourself, right? Are you more on the dev side, are you more on the operations side, or are you somewhere in between, right? And I think a lot of people are kind of in that weird, muddy middle area, but it helps just to let me tailor this next part to you. So go ahead and click that poll. Now, we talked a lot about, things I think that are pretty standard, right? Like we all know version control. We know, the importance of being able to quickly build and deploy our software and to reduce that sort of cycle time, right? Yeah, it looks like most people here are some mixture of both. Cool. So this next part should be really, hopefully something pretty interesting to you. This is what, the users of your application see, right? If you think of an ocean and you think of like an iceberg, then people only see this very small sort of, tip of the iceberg, so to speak, right? If you can go to the next slide. But what we know as a developer or someone that is whose job it is to maintain and improve our application, it's a lot more complex than that. We have not only a lot of depth, but a lot of interconnectedness between different components, between different services. And it can be very difficult for any one person, regardless of your role, to accurately understand what's going on in our application, especially in production, right? So next slide, please. So you might have heard this term observability kind of thrown around, and I talk about this a lot. I think observability it's two parts really. It's not just sort of this what you see here, which is how well can I understand my system given the telemetry data it emits, but there's also a lot of like cultural components to it as well, right? It gives us a language to sort of talk about performance and understand performance. But we're not going to dwell on that too much. Just know that this is more complicated, I guess, than it initially appears. But one of the critical parts, certainly a requirement for observability is this idea that my services, my application is emitting telemetry data. So how do you do that? Next slide, please. Well, we believe at Lightstep and a lot of our friends that telemetry needs to be this built-in feature, right? This can't be something that you're spending a lot of time doing on your own. And in a lot of ways, it makes sense that it shouldn't be, right? There's a kind of a maxim in monitoring that you want to monitor one step below, one layer of abstraction below the thing that's actually that you care about. So if I care about, my application performance, then I really want to be monitoring the framework that my application is running in, right? Or if I care about, the amount of people that are hitting a given API endpoint, then all the data I need to monitor that is actually something from, whatever my RPC framework is. And the telemetry that I need from that isn't just, logging statements. It's not just, metric counts. It's also distributed traces, right? It's how the combination of these multiple types of data and how you can interrelate them with each other. Next slide, please. So to that end, about over a year ago now, Lightstep was we were heavily involved in open tracing. Google and Microsoft and several other companies were heavily involved in open census. So we decided to sort of merge these projects together and create open telemetry, which is, not only the next major version of these telemetry frameworks, it's also recently come into beta. It's effectively now going to be, the standard way that you would instrument your applications for observability to get that telemetry data out that you need to have, to really make use of observability. So in sort of the constraints of this webinar, I can't really show you everything about how you would get started with OpenTelemetry or how you would use it, but there's a lot of great resources on that on the OpenTelemetry website or on the Lightstep website that you can look into. But I kind of want to show you, what one thing I get is, hey, so we go through, we do all this instrumentation, we have OpenTelemetry integrated, we have CI/CD. What do I actually get from that? So let's go to the next slide. And I want to show you, kind of the result, right? If you've gone through, you've done the instrumentation with OpenTelemetry. Let's go back one, and actually let me share my screen. And I will show sort of what this all looks like in practice. Make that window a little wider. Hopefully everyone can see the screen. If you can't, just throw something in the Q&A, I guess. And also feel free, if there's anything that I go over here that you want more detail on, be sure to use the Q&A feature on your Zoom control panel, or throw something in the chat and we can get to it. Just make sure I have the chat open here. Cool. So what you're looking at right now is Lightstep, and what I've got here is actually an application that has been deployed using GitLab. So I want to switch over and show you that. I'm also going to try to pull up the application here. But first, let's talk about what this application actually is. So this is a fairly complex, microservice application called Hipster Shop. And you can see sort of the service diagram here. This is the architecture of the app. We've got a front end. We have kind of a load generator that's actually, sending data to it all the time. But you can also, just go in and use it, which is nice. That all talks to a front end service. That front end service communicates with many other services all over gRPC. And you can see the relationships between these. Each of the languages are written, or each of the services are written in a different language quite often. And maybe this is, this is something I find more and more common, especially in places that are doing kind of larger, larger teams, larger organizations where you maybe are blending multiple services from different applications together. And you want to, you suddenly have to integrate like a Node service and a C# service and this and that and the other. So we can go and I can take a look at this. 3, 4, 7, 2, 16, 7, and see our application running in Kubernetes on the internet. And it's a shopping cart, right? I can buy things, fake things, but still get all the donuts and coffee that I could possibly want. So how did I actually build and deploy this with GitLab? So GitLab has this CI/CD pipelines here. And you can see you've got a bunch of different deployment or builds and deploys. We can actually go back and jump into the configuration. So the config is actually, or the way you set up as someone that didn't use GitLab before I started doing this webinar, prepping for this webinar, I found it pretty easy to get started. It's all YAML. You can make multiple stages. This is how, if you remember from Kevin's part where he was showing that pipeline, each of those stages is configured in YAML. So I've got a bunch of things here that are going through creating a Docker image from the Docker file that's in each of my services, and then pushing that to the GitLab container registry. And at the bottom here, I have a deploy stage that takes all those containers that I had built and uses the Helm chart to install the application into my Kubernetes cluster. And a lot of this stuff, you might notice that there's a lot of environment variables here, like things like kube namespace. I didn't actually have to do a lot of this stuff GitLab did for me, I should say. So if I go into my environments here under operations, I can see that I have this Kubernetes environment. I can see all the deployments to it. I can go and I can look at, I can see that I have 11 instances. There's a couple of oddities there, but we'll ignore those. And I can jump in and I can look at, here's the actual deploy stage the last time I deployed my application. And I can see here, hey, we deployed a new one. If I wanted to make changes to something, I could do that, simply by, making a pull request or a merge request, sorry. Or just editing the code, pushing to master. I have a trigger set up for everything, which is nice. As I'm going through and I'm, placing orders and actually using the application, I want to see how this actually looks, right? I want to see what's actually going on, in prod. So I'm going to switch over to Lightstep now. And what we have here is, this is the Lightstep service directory. This is sort of your landing page when you jump into Lightstep. And you can see I've got a bunch of services over here, and these correspond to the services in the application. So if I jump back down, you can kind of prove it yourself. Here's front end, checkout, email, payment, shipping, front end, email, so on and so forth. For each of these, I can view, performance. One nice thing about Lightstep is that, we're not just showing you averages, we're showing you sort of your long tail latency as well. So you can see these lines here. The blue is P50, so that's my average. P95, P99 are my long tail latencies. So this is the 99th percentile and 95th percentile. I can look at my operation rate, so I can see, hey, how many requests are being made per second. And I can look at various other things here. If I want to, let me find a better one. There we go. So if I actually want to take, and I want to dive into some of this more, I can go and I can use Lightstep's deployment analysis to sort of compare my current behavior with some baseline, right? So if I say this, old data, this is my baseline performance, and this is what I'm actually analyzing, I can view a latency comparison between these two. I can kind of put my average wherever I want. So if I put it there, P50, here's my P99 up here. I can also look at, compare each operation in this service and look at the change in performance between them. And I can see sort of examples of that operation. So in this case, we're calling convert, or we can see really going way down into the weeds here, where we're looking at this particular get currency data method call in my currency service, which if I wanted to, I could go back over here and, what was this one? Get currency data. I can then very quickly jump into the actual code in GitLab that corresponds to that. Some other, now a neat use case for this is, I've got all this information here, right? This is what's also interesting here is compared to something, other sort of monitoring or observability tools. 100% of the data that you're seeing here is this is unsampled, right? We do a form of dynamic sampling where 100% of the data from your application gets fed into Lightstep, and we're viewing that, so we can actually create these accurate sort of latency calculations for you, which also means that any sort of, outlier or one-off sort of issue is going to pop up in, sorry about that, in my, data that I can view. So let's say I have a feature flag, right? And this is, I think, becoming more common where rather than just saying like, I'm going to roll out a new version of something, we're going to put it behind a feature flag. GitLab has a really nice feature flag feature where I can create a flag, I can, target this to specific users, do a percentage rollout, I can target specific user IDs. In this case, I'm going to just say, turn it on for everyone. And then what I would expect that to do, let's actually make sure that got through. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to look now in our code and we're going to find where this is actually should be affecting my application. So I have two places in here. I've got this cart service and then checkout service, and these both should change their behavior now that I've enabled that feature flag. In the checkout service, I should see latency in my gRPC health check, and then in my cart service, I should see this in Redis cart store. So let's jump back to Lightstep, and let's go in and start querying things. So I want to look at the checkout service, and then I want to look at this check operation. And we can see now on my latency histogram that I suddenly have this pile of data up here, or I have this weird outlier where I see a bunch of, hey, 3 seconds, which is what I would expect. A 50th percentile is only the same as the mean if your distribution. That's true. Keep in mind that at that point, I was oversimplifying. So we can see that, that feature flag successfully worked, right? If I had gone in and done this, I could have actually added more data to these spans where I could, do an actual search for, hey, let me see things where that span is enabled versus where it's disabled. I didn't because the actual instrumentation for this application was all added automatically. I didn't go in and add any kind of manual instrumentation code. This is all just importing Lightstep's, distributed tracing libraries and kind of letting it go loose and instrument all my functions and my frameworks. So, but if you wanted to, you could go in, you could say like, hey, one thing that I've seen people do is instrument the actual feature flag library itself in order to get that sort of information. So the second one was in, let's go double check again, where's in this cart service, right? So let's look at cart service. And I believe it's, let's just look at everything there. So the actual, it's in the constructor of Redis cart store. Excuse me. So if we start looking at varying operations here, what we should see, what we would expect to see is this update user profile value will change based on if that is enabled. So if that is enabled, then we should see it would help if I could remember things for more than 3 seconds at a time. Update user profile value. So we should see on the update user profile, we should see a sleep for 3 seconds. So I want to change this. And update user profile, which I don't see, which is strange, right? Because it should be there according to the code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to still filter to my cart service, and I'm going to start trying to figure out why isn't this feature flag working? Why am I not seeing the data that I expect to see? So what I want to do is I want to group by. So I know that the feature flag service works by the feature flag client will talk to the feature flag server. So let me try to find those spans. So I can group by whichever dimension I want on the tags or attributes. There's no limit to the amount of tags or attributes you can set on span data for Lightstep. We take all of it. This means that I can really easily kind of filter and cut down my data by any dimension I want. So I see here that I do have a bunch of requests to this URL. So let me bounce into here. Let me turn that off. And I see I have a lot of GET requests to this GitLab URL. And then I see that I have 401s, which is strange. So let's group by that status code. 247. Oh, it's restricted to the cart service. So yeah, a lot of 401s, and these 200s are all to Lightstep, where we're actually tracing. Since this is automatic instrumentation, we're seeing it's tracing the outgoing reports to Lightstep. But that 401 makes me pretty sure that the reason it's not actually activating the feature flag is because it's getting a unsuccessful response from the GitLab feature flag server. And spoiler, I knew I was going to do this because I did some preparation. And the reason why is actually because of a bug in the feature flag client. But now if I didn't know that, that would be my next step, is to be like, okay, well, why am I getting a 401? Go investigate that, and so on and so forth, right? So what I've been able to do here is, without having to, go and do a bunch of searches in logs or do, convoluted trying to figure out what's going on mess, I was able to pretty quickly say, hey, I see there's a problem in this feature flag not enabling. Let me drill down and try to figure out what that problem was, which I was able to figure out was because we were getting a 401 to the feature flag server. And I can also see on, my front end here, or on my service diagram here, where I'm getting latency, or where not errors. I'm looking at this has one error. So this looks like it's another timeout or cancellation or something where we errored out trying to get that feature flag. So again, pretty quickly able to kind of spot the problem without having to do a bunch of digging or switching between tools or anything like that. And then if I wanted to fix this, I would go in, make a merge request, figure out what the problem with the library was, make a merge request, and then when that merged into master, it would automatically deploy using my pipeline here, which you can see. Oh, not jobs. There. Which I would be able to, build and then deploy out to Kubernetes. So that's kind of the high level. If you want to know more about sort of this stuff, or have more specific questions, then I would say definitely check us out at lightstep.com, and we can do a demo more suited to kind of your specific use case. But overall, I think what I like about this is sort of more of a dev person, is that it is really easy for me to see what to have that to tighten that cycle, right? It takes me less time to go in and investigate issues and then go back, make a fix, deploy that, right? I don't have to spend a bunch of time digging through 5 different tabs here trying to go from logs to metrics to back to logs to traces to da 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 da. So I will turn it back over to Kevin.
Awesome. So to sum up, when choosing a tool, these tools should ultimately help you ship faster, ship more confidently, which you can with GitLab and Lightstep. We believe at GitLab that like the CI/CD workflow is super important. So as much as you can leverage it and build your process and tooling in place, that's a great way to enable you to innovate faster. And as Austin pointed out, OpenTelemetry is a great open source project sponsored by CNCF. I believe for most languages, it's currently in beta. If you are looking for a vendor agnostic, industry best practices set of libraries to instrument your application with, OpenTelemetry is a great choice. And lastly, of course, Austin walked us through that demo showing the power of Lightstep and GitLab together to help you identify and resolve issues quickly. Here's some information and links. I believe you will have access to the slide deck. If you want to talk to me about GitLab's vision for the monitor stage, feel free to schedule a time to chat. There's more information on Lightstep. There's a sandbox that you can try out Lightstep with. There's a bunch of resources out there for GitLab as well, and some contact information if you want to get in touch. Thank you, and we'll move on to questions if there are any.
Great, thank you. And just a quick reminder that if you do have questions, you can post them in the Q&A. I'm going to read some of the questions that have come through. First one is, what are some differentiating features of GitLab Monitor?
Sure, so GitLab as one application for your entire DevOps lifecycle, we believe that the power of being an integrated tool is at the end of the day really helpful for developers. Having your whatever monitoring information that you're looking at and having your code right there within the same system enables you to transition between debugging to actually fixing the code faster. And of course, eventually having monitoring being part of your CI/CD pipeline also allows you to eventually resolve issues faster. And on top of that, we are also taking a holistic view on how to help people resolve incidents quicker and altogether preventing them from happening to start with. So we also have tools like incident management. We're working on alert management right now. so that you can have all of these different, right now, what's most likely disconnected parts of your tool chain together within one single application.
Perfect, thank you. We've got one more in the queue here. Is it best to use one tool that gives you tracing, metrics, or logging, or would you select a tool for each?
I'll take that one. I think the real power in observability isn't necessarily so two hats, right? Like my developer advocate hat says, use what's best. And I think what's best is usually going to be something that really integrates all these different things for you, right? You don't want to. I'll give you an example from like my personal history. I used to be like a DevOps architect, right? And I would always get paged at like really inconvenient times because something failed, or like we had this really mysterious issue, and because we didn't have sort of a unified way to handle logs or traces or metrics or anything, most of the time what I did is I would have to like sit there and look at some time series and then try to find like look at the VMware time series dashboards, and I would say like, okay, well at 2:36 a.m. this memory usage spiked up on this set of machines, and so then I would go and I would run some just grep query. I would look at all these different logs and I would grep across all these different logs to try to narrow to that time, or like a 5-minute range kind of around that time, and then look and see, oh, okay, well, the problem was over here, right? Or it was on this one host. But there can be so many different things that are related, right? I would a lot of times have like, well, these 2 or 3 or 4 machines all sort of start having different problems around the same time. But is that because one of them was having problems talking to this other machine, or because the service had gone down, right? You're basically trying to sort of piece together what happened, and that in and of itself took 15, 20, 30 minutes to try to kind of recreate this story of, hey, this is what led to this failure. Whereas with something where you've integrated sort of logs and metrics and traces, it's much easier to be able to look at that one tab and say, okay, the problem, here's what we saw, here's the result, and now let me back up and say, okay, well, let me focus on this service, and then group together all these particular operations, and so on and so on and so forth, right? And have a link between metrics and logs, and metrics and traces, and logs and traces, and so on and so forth. So I think that there's a lot of, obviously you should use whatever is best for your kind of current circumstance, right? But I think there's a lot of advantages to having everything integrated as well.
Great, thank you. Have one more question here in the queue. How do we switch the traces from multiple monitoring tools from each layer using Lightstep?
So if you are using like open telemetry or open tracing or something, if you're using an open standard already, then it's pretty easy because we kind of natively accept all that stuff. If you, let's say you're using Jaeger or something as kind of your existing tracing tool, then you can just point all that data to Lightstep and we will natively accept it. If you have like multiple different tracing tools, like you've got Jaeger for some services and Zipkin for some services and Datadog for other services, and maybe something like, I don't know, like Sentry or something on the front end, then it can take a little more work. Then you kind of have to, you basically need to figure out one way to sort of propagate traces throughout your application and then standardize on that and then send it to Lightstep. We do have ways to kind of join separate traces. It's a feature called oh gosh, what is it? Like GUID trace assembly. So if you have like, let's say two incompatible traces, you can tell us, hey, this is actually, you can basically tell us a tag, or you can give those a tag and say, this defines the relationship, and then we will figure it out and work backwards for you. But generally, you would need to do a little bit of instrumentation work to kind of patch that hole of these things having compatible um, trace contexts. OpenTelemetry makes this pretty easy though. Like if something you're using is open tracing compatible, then OpenTelemetry is a drop-in replacement, and it uses W3C trace context, which is a W3C standard. So everything kind of will natively be speaking that going forward. And
I would add that
yeah,
most vendors today have adopted the W3C trace context as a standard. So depending on where they are in their development cycle, they may have
yeah.
implemented it.
I'm gonna assume this is a follow-up. You have Dynatrace and New Relic. Um, I believe that the Dynatrace and New Relic stuff, depending on what you have, is all proprietary. So there might you would probably need to replace that with some sort of standards-based tracing, but it probably wouldn't be that hard. If you're using like, let's say you're using Java or C# or something, then it's all pretty automated to like there's integrations into Spring or ASP.NET, so you just kind of like import the open telemetry stuff and then point it at Lightstep and it just works. If you'd like more information on that, I would recommend you follow up with myself or like another Lightstep person, just because it's not impossible. It's just I would need more information to really give you a better answer than the one I just gave you.
Great, thank you. And with that, we will wrap up today's presentation. Just a reminder that this has been recorded and we'll be sharing the recording with everyone who registered. And we want to thank our speakers for today. Thank you.
Thanks.